Today's lesson 3, Tower of Babel, Origin of Nations. And this is the last lesson in series 3 after the Genesis flood. The first 2 are the Ice Age, only the Bible explains it, and the post-flood weather and climate. Next week we'll start series 4 entitled Creationism versus Evolution. Lesson 1, millions of years, where did it come from? And we'll talk about the history of that, and you'll find out it's not very old. Lesson 2, ape men, the grand deception. We'll go over all these ape men and see if there's any true missing links. Lesson 3, radioactive radiocarbon dating, turning foe into friend. And then lesson 4 of evolutionary inaccuracies. We'll look at some of the textbooks that they're teaching our kids and see if there's some inaccuracies in it, and you'll see many. And then the final lesson, dangers of evolution, and we'll talk about the impact on society and the church. Today's outline, Tower of Babel, Origin of Nations. We'll go over the biblical account of the Tower of Babel. We'll answer the Tower of Babel questions and how it connects into the origin of nations and how they spread out across the world. And then the descendants of Ham, Shem, and Japheth had remarkable engineering and astronomy and timekeeping skills. We'll show some examples of that. They weren't dumb as secularists would believe. And then we'll finalize this with basic genetics. We'll first talk about the dog kind and the human kind. I'm referencing a lot of my material from this book called The Tower of Babel, The Cultural History of Our Ancestors from Bodie Hodge, answersingenesis.org. So let's start with what the Bible teaches about the Tower of Babel, and that's found in Genesis chapter 11. We'll start with verses 1 through 3. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And then 4 through 6. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one. They all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. And then verses 7 through 9. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. I'd like to show a short video on Babel from Answers in Genesis, and it'll summarize what we just read.
After the flood, Noah and his family gave thanks and offered sacrifices to God for preserving them. God told Noah to go and multiply and fill the earth. Noah's family flourished and multiplied, but they did not spread all over the earth. Instead, they moved down from the mountains of Ararat and settled in the plain of Shinar and dreamed of building a great city. Come, let us build a city and a tower to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, looked down upon them and saw the city and the tower they were building. They are united and speak the same language. Now nothing they imagine to do will be impossible for them. So God went down and confused their language so they could not understand each other. And God scattered them over the face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. They left Babel by foot, by cart, and by boat. Because of the language barriers, each family group became isolated and developed distinct physical traits and cultures. But all came from the three sons of Noah, so they all share the same genes and all share the same promise of the Savior, the seed which God promised to Adam in the Garden of Eden.
Point number 2 of our outline. Let's answer some Tower of Babel questions, and this will go fairly long, and how the origin of nations came to be. Some questions are, what did the tower look like? Why were the people disobedient? Where and when did the scattering occur? Where did the people go initially, then eventually? So to answer the first question, what did the tower look like? Well, here's a painting from Pieter Bruegel from 1563 showing what the Tower of Babel may have looked like to him. And we have another tower from Gustave Doré from 1865, and you can see his tower goes up into the clouds and spirals down to the base. We have an actual ziggurat of Uruk, and that's what it looks like when they unearthed it. And we have another one, the ziggurat at from Sir Leonard Woolley, and this is where Abraham actually came from. But there are ziggurats all around the world. When God separated the families from the Tower of Babel, they brought that building concept to different parts of the world, and they rebuilt their own version. Next question, why were the people disobedient? Well, let's look at some background on that. We'll go back to Genesis 9, verse 1 and 7, and it reads, So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That's the key phrase. Verse 7, And as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. And let's go back to a command by God at creation in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 1:28, and it reads, Then God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. So God told man to fill the earth ever since creation. In Genesis 11:4, the descendants of Noah's sons said, Come, let us build us a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. So note that they were trying to intentionally defy God. They knew that God's command was to go out and fill the earth, but they were deliberately going against God's command. Also, you see a little heart problem when it said, let us make a name for ourselves. You could view that as they're not looking out for others but themselves. And if we go back to Genesis 6:4, before the flood, it says, Those were the mighty men of who were old, men of renown, where God had to judge the world with the global flood. So similar to the wicked people before the flood, they too were trying to make a name for themselves, and look at the results, which had tremendous violence and destroyed the world. God's dispersal weakens the spread of wickedness. Cities tend to strengthen evil, and that's referenced in 11:3, which we read. They said, Come, let's build ourselves a city and make a tower. Also, common language can assist evil as well. That's why God came and gave them multiple languages. And when God said they have one language, now nothing they purpose to do will be withheld from them. So some points on God's judgment. People together in large numbers are more likely to generate evil practices because of our sin nature. And one language increases the communication of evil, but multiple language, which have supernatural origins at the Tower of Babel. So God used language barriers to fulfill his purpose of filling the earth, so it forced people to scatter across the world. Now note, if we go back to when this happened, all people descended from Noah are about 150 generations ago, so it's really not that long ago if you think about it. Next question, where did the scattering occur? Well, we can go to Genesis 11 verses 1 and 2, where it says, "Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and the people journeyed from the east. They found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there." Shinar means two rivers. So the thinking is, with answers in Genesis, the Tower of Babel, a possible location would be in Iraq between the Tigris and Euphrates River. When did the scattering occur? We'll go back to this. I brought this up last week. The flood occurred 2348 BC, or 1656 AM. What's AM? Anno Mundi, or the years after creation. So the Tower of Babel is believed occurred 2242 BC, or 1762 AM. And where does that come from? I'm referencing James Ussher, and I have the book called The Annals of the World in 2006. And he estimates that the Tower of Babel occurred 106 years after the flood. Remember, we talked about the Ice Age, and we said that the Ice Age took 500 years to peak and then 200 years to melt away. So if you add those up, 106, so the Ice Age just started getting going, and then we still had several hundred years, and I'll get into why that's important. So the Ice Age was just starting up by the time of Tower of Babel. Also, Peleg, if you look, Shem, first of all, Noah lived to be 950 years, but Arphaxad, Selah, Eber, Peleg, and then some other generations. Peleg was the first of the major sons to die after the flood. I thought that was kind of interesting. So we have the next video was the dispersion of Babel a real event, and this is Bodie Hodge, and this is from the Answers to DVD from Answers in Genesis, and he'll describe this in more detail.
Was the dispersion at Babel a real event?
Well, the first thing you should do is establish that the Bible is the authority. Once you've established that the Bible is the authority, that's when you can dive into the Scriptures and take a look and see what the Bible's actually talking about when it talks about the Tower of Babel, or more appropriately, Babel, as the Hebrew tongue would put it. One of the things that I would do is dispel one of the myths right off the bat. Some people have said, well, hold on a second here. Why is God being so mean that he would come down and he would judge these innocent people and confuse their languages? Well, if you jump back to Genesis 9:1, when Noah and his family first came off the ark, the Lord blessed Noah and his sons and their families, and he said, hey, spread out and fill the earth. What happened at the Tower of Babel, if you jump to Genesis chapter 11, verse 4, it says that they said, hey, we don't want to be scattered. So they came together and they wanted to build a tower so they wouldn't be spread out about the earth and to fill the earth. So what happens when you defy the Lord? Well, he comes down and he steps in. So the Lord wasn't being an ogre in that sense. What he was doing is he was stepping in to fulfill what should have been done. Another thing you could do is you can explain when the Tower of Babel was. Now, the Scripture is not straightforward when the Tower of Babel was, but if we look at some of the chronologists, for example, Archbishop James Ussher, who is one of the most popular chronologists, he did his chronology in the 1600s, and he even had his dates appear in the King James Bible for several hundred years. He places the Tower of Babel 106 years after the flood. By our common dating system, that would have been about 2242 BC. Now, whether that's accurate or not, I'm not exactly certain, but let's just assume for a moment that that was correct. Now, as soon as we would assume that, some people say, hold on a second, Bodie, what about all those languages? There's somewhere in the neighborhood of just under 7,000 languages in the world today. Are you saying that 8 people came off the ark and in 106 years there was about 7,000 languages? Well, no, I'm not saying that at all. Actually, linguists and people who've studied these languages, what they've done is they've looked at them and they've grouped them into language families. For example, the Latin-based language language family. It has Italian, it has Romanian, it has French, it has Spanish, it even has some English in there as well. Of course, English also has a Germanic root, which is why it's a little bit different than some of these other languages. But what they've done is they've taken these various languages and they've narrowed it down to no more than 94 language families. Now, to me, that was exciting because if you look at Genesis chapter 10 and you add up all the various families that came out of there with the new language, you get no less than 78. There's actually more than that. We're just not certain exactly how many there were. So at that point, hey, that's a great confirmation of what the scriptures are really teaching.
So where did the people go initially? Well, we can get background from Genesis 9:18 through 19. Now the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham was the father of Canaan. And verse 19, these three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. Genesis 10:1, now this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and sons were born to them after the flood. Skip down to verse 5, were separated into their lands, every one according to his language, according to their families, and to their nations. So if you look at Genesis 10 and break it down like Answers in Genesis did, the table of nations, they broke it down by the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So they had at least 70 families, or they believe 70 languages, descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then here's a PDF file that I was able to download recently where it breaks it down, and you can also pull it out of the Bible, where it breaks it down all the sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, and so forth, and then their sons. So if you add up all the different sons of Japheth, Ham, and Shem, you can connect it by their clans, lands, and their nations to at least 70. He mentioned 78, but I think the number now that they're firmly holding to is at least 70 different sons of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and 70 different overarching languages. Then you had sub-languages that came after that. Genesis 10:32, these were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations in their nations, and from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. So Shem was the father of many in the Middle East, and so his residence extended from the Middle East for Shem, and then many went into Asia and India. Ham is the father of many in Africa, and some in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. Japheth is the father of the European peoples, some in the Middle East and some to the Far East and Northern Asia. And some would say many people in America, especially the Anglo-Saxons, we would descend from Japheth. So here's Institute for Creation Research, where they do a short video describing the disbursement of language.
As populations spread and diversified, so did language. But unlike the secular view of it, the disbursement of language was not some gradual, natural result of migration. It was the result of man's arrogance. See, the descendants of Noah's sons are called Hamitic, Shemitic, and Japhetic. United by a common language, these groups conspired to build a city with a tower that reached to heaven. To prevent humanity from uniting in evil, God scattered them abroad from the Tower of Babel over the face of all the earth and confused the language of all the earth so that they may not understand one another's speech. Scattering the people and confusing a common language into many was God's way of intervening in the affairs of mankind while keeping his promise that there would not be another worldwide catastrophe like the flood. This event resulted in the founding of the 70 original nations. The descendants of Noah were dispersed, and as Genesis 10:5 says, separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. Secular linguists have identified about 70 major language groups around the world, same as in the Bible. 300 languages and even more dialects within each language would eventually grow from those spoken in the nations identified in Scripture. The Shemitic nations spread through what we call the Middle East, while the descendants of Ham populated Africa and Asia, and the Japhethite people settled in present-day Europe. Each developed its own new language. Today, we recognize that people from these different regions of the world have different physical features, like skin color or the shape of their eyes.
Where did the people scatter to eventually? Here's a video what he does is he'll tie in the Ice Age and where the land bridges opened up. And then I'll add to his comments further. But this video is entitled, Be Fruitful, Multiply, and Fill the Earth, and how the land bridges were formed.
Remember what God promised to Noah. Genesis 9:1 tells us, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Even secular scientists agree that the glaciation during the Ice Age caused the sea levels to drop, revealing bridges of land between continents. They also agree that as these ice sheets expanded, they forced humans and animals to migrate to warmer latitudes in order to survive. Could this have just been coincidence? I like to think it was just God's way of helping mankind fulfill his command.
So if you lower the sea level with all that 30% of the land filled with ice and snow, here you get natural land bridges from Russia to Alaska. And some of the migration patterns could have come through here all the way down to North America and all the way to South America. Also, you get land bridges that opens up Australia where people could migrate that way, or at least take a small boat trip over to Australia. So the population migration after the flood opened up the entire world with those land bridges. So it's very exciting to see how the Ice Age after the flood, all that moisture going on the land, opened up land bridges so man could fulfill God's promise of filling the earth after God changed all the languages to force the families to move. Another thing that people question is, what was the world population growth? Can we explain the world growing from 8 people to 8 billion today? Well, the answer is yes. If we look at an exponential curve, the world population growth assumes 2.3 kids per family every generation since 1000 BC. We get that curve fitting perfectly. So also before 1000 BC, it assumes 2.6 kids per family every generation since the flood. So this fits our current population, 8 billion people. Remember, evolution says there are hundreds of thousands of years of human growth. So if you go back hundreds of thousands of years and use this exponential curve, you would have trillions of people. We'd be tripping over people if there was that many. But what's amazing is the population growth model fits exactly what the Bible teaches. So we can have confidence in what the Bible does teach. And here's a video clip from Institute for Christian Research on the population traced to Noah's sons, and they'll talk more about this.
Is it possible that all the global population can be traced back to Noah's sons?
Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 and 19 discusses the population of the earth. It says, Now the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. The Bible also speaks of the population after the flood in Genesis chapter 10, verse 32, which reads, These were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations, in their nations. And from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. If you use a very modest population growth rate, one where each person is replaced by 1.2 people, you can arrive at a number that is actually far beyond today's current population. So if that's the average, from the time frame from the flood's ending to today, which is roughly 4,500 years, you have today's population. And that's assuming that the generations, that is from one generation to the next, is 4 or 3 times each century, 45 centuries.
Okay, hopefully that encourages you that everything's lining up for what the Bible teaches. Next, remarkable engineering and astronomy timekeeping skills. So the sons of Noah and their descendants had intelligence. So the early civilization, we have the flood ending at 2348 BC. Peleg was born, and then you had the Tower of Babel, 2242 BC, and then you had Egypt founded, Manassas, 2188 BC, and then Greece was founded, 2088 BC. What did they do? They had remarkable engineering skills. The pyramids and the Sphinx at Giza. This is from Donald Chittick in his book, The Puzzle of Ancient Man, and he said the best quality pyramids are the oldest ones, yet there is no evidence of any experimentation on how to build them. Some blocks weigh over 200 tons and are put together in such a way that more than one had to be together like a gigantic jigsaw. We can't do that today. Another place is near Cusco, Peru, where they found dry stone walls with 20-ton blocks, and the stones fit perfectly together and are not rectangular, and there is no mortar in between them. In fact, you can't even get a piece of paper in between them, and we can't even figure out how to do that today. It's amazing how they had that knowledge. Also, astronomy and accurate timekeeping. You probably heard about the Mayan observatory, during the year 2000, was it 12? There was talk about the Mayan calendar saying the end of the world at one time. But using astronomical measurements, the Mayans constructed a calendar more accurate than it is in use today. And there's a picture of the Mayan astronomical tower. Also, Stonehenge, England, it appears to be very accurate astronomical calculator. No one knows how the stones were moved into position. The fourth point, and this is the final one, and I'll spend some time on this, basic genetics. Let's talk about the dog and humankind. So basic genetics. First of all, I brought this up in a previous talk before. We have evolution's tree. Remember, evolution teaches that it rained on the rocks for millions of years, and you had primordial slime, and then out of the slime came creatures evolve into, then came on land, and then you had dinosaurs, and eventually ape men, and then man. That's the evolutionary tree. But in the Bible, God talks about kinds, and God created the original kinds, the original dog, the ape, the finch, the elephant, the dinosaur, the cat. And it describes this in Genesis. Let's read Genesis 1:24. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind." We talked about this in the first lesson. "Cattle and creeping things and the beast of the earth, each according to its kind." And it was so. If you tally it up in Genesis 1, where it says according to their kinds, God said it a total of 10 times. So it must be important. Now, the seculars have their own categorization. It goes from kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Now, the kinds, the thinking is in the family level, or the Hebrew word, I probably can't pronounce it right, min or mean. There might be like elephants are at the order level, but most of this is in the family level, not in the species level. So the family kind, you have the cat kind, and the dog kind. The dog family, Canidae, is a diverse group of total of 34 species that came out of the original dog kind. And we have different types of dogs, from the fennec fox, the jackal, African wild, bat-eared fox. So foxes are a part of the dog kind. Bush dog, another Corsic fox, Cape fox. You have bulldogs, Chihuahua, Siberian husky, Arctic wolves, coyotes, gray wolf, polar fox. What's interesting, based on genetic and morphological and behavioral data, it is clear that the domestic dog originates from the wolf. So the wolf gave rise to all our domestic varieties of dogs, from greyhound to pointer, Poodle, English Bulldog, Dalmatian, and Beagle, even to the Poodle, as I mentioned. So is this evolution? We go from the original wolf-like dog to the Poodle? Is that evolution? No, it's actually a downhill genetic process involving a loss of information. We'll get into this more. Okay, so the original kinds that God created that also went on the ark. You had 2 dogs that went on the ark. You had 2 cats. And we had 8 humans. But God created the dogs and the cats, the original dog, original cat, with the maximum genetic diversity. He gave them everything they needed. So let's go with the dog kind. So the dog, the original dog God created, had their own offspring and became developing into these species that we just highlighted, the coyote, the collie, the bulldog. But when you do that, you get less genetic information and less genetic diversity. So over time, the different species results in this less genetic diversity, and you lose information. Here's an example. With the dog kind, you had the original wolf that either came off Noah's Ark, we'll use that, or God created. And then you go down, then the coyote, lose more information, African wild dog, collie, bulldog, eventually you're down to the poodle. So this is opposite of evolution, because evolution says you're getting new information. You're growing from the primordial slime up the dog and up to us. But this is really a loss of information. Evolution says you're gaining, but what we're actually seeing is we're conservation of information. So you go from the wolf to the poodle, you're losing information, there's no new information added. So let's discuss basic genetics. I tried to keep it simple. So in genetics, you can think of big A, little a, big B, big C, little c. Capital letters represent dominant genes, and little letters can represent recessive genes, or the ones that are hidden. So you can get one set of genes from the male and female. So what are the possible combinations in the offsprings? So the male had, a big A, big B, big C, and little a, little b, little c, same way with the female. So their first offspring, they adopted all capitals, all capital A, capital B's, capital C's. Because you get one set of genes from the male and one from the female. But you could have variation within the dog kind. So let's highlight this a little bit more. So the capital A's, it has less information. What do I mean? Well, if you compare that to the mother and father, we lost the small A's, the small B's, and the small C's. So the offspring only has capital. So the next generation would lose some of that information because they lost it with the parents. Now let's look at another example. Let's see all small a, small b's, and small c's. And the poodle may be something like this. The question is, can we go from breeding poodles all the way back to the original wolf? Anyone answer that? Can we go from the poodle to the original wolf kind? Anyone want to guess that? Yes or no? Can we go from the poodle back to the wolf? No, we can't. Because you're missing the big A, big B, and big C. It has less information. Now, can we go from the original wolf back to the poodle? And the answer is yes, because they had the original genetic information. So you can go only one direction. The original kind had everything. Once they start having kids or offspring, they started losing information. I want to get an idea of how much variation God gave us in our genes. So how much did God put in there? So let's start with the number of atoms in the known universe. Atoms are very tiny. You have to use a super microscope to see them. So scientists have calculated if you add up all the atoms through outer space and on Earth, that number comes to 10 to the 80th power, or that's 1 with 80 zeros after it. I mean, that's a massive number. It's even hard to comprehend that big of a number, right? That's a lot of atoms. Well, this gets even amazingly higher. The number of children one man and one woman could have without two children looking the same, and that is 10 to the 2017th power, or 1 with 2017 zeros. This is the genetic capability that God has given man and woman. This is not evolution. This is what God has created with the original kind, whether it's animals or people. So Adam and Eve had this, and we still have it today. So it's astronomically high variability and diversity. Now you can see why no two people are alike. Everyone is unique and different to one another. And we can go one step further. Every snowflake is unique and different from one another. So there's scientific proof that it's almost impossible to have two children looking the same because of the diversity that God gave us at creation. So let's apply this. Let's talk about two dogs that came off Noah's Ark, okay? The original kind. There's only two. So those two dogs had offspring or puppies, all right? And then their offspring had more puppies, and then their offspring had puppies, and then their offspring had puppies until you have lots of dogs everywhere, all over the place. Doesn't take a lot of time to get a massive population of dogs. Now, so what did the dogs do? You get different species of dogs forming from the variability gene pool that God gave them in the original dog kind. And the dogs start spreading across the world and filling the earth. So let's apply simple genetics. Let's say the two original dogs off of Noah's Ark had a short-haired gene called S and a long-haired gene called L. So the combination of the short and long give the original dogs, or the wolf, medium-haired genes, okay? Hopefully you're with me so far. All right. So their offspring adopted the short-haired gene from the mother and a short-haired gene from the father and had two short-haired genes, so the offspring has short hair. Now the secularists and the evolutionists will say, there's evolution. It's a different type of dog. Well, it's really not. The offspring has a genetic capability to have short hair. It got the genes from the mother and father. It's a new combination of information already there. It's not evolution. That is genetic ability within the original dog kind. So they had more offspring. So the next puppy had adopted a short-haired gene from mom and a long-haired gene from dad and made the dog medium hair. And then the third offspring or puppy adopted a long-haired gene from mom and a long-haired gene from dad, and the dog had long hair. So hopefully you get the concept. So, but notice the short-haired dog lost the long-haired gene. He doesn't have an L there anymore. And notice the long-haired dog does not have a short-haired gene. That was lost information. So this will, with this concept, and I'll go further, this will help us understand natural selection, speciation, and adaptation. So let's, you have three dogs from the original two dogs from Noah's Ark, all right? Let's say the three dogs go to a cold climate. The ice age is building up, they kind of meander that way. What happens? Well, if they're in a cold climate, the short hair and medium haired dog get cold, okay? But not the long one because he has the long fur. He's fine. So what happens to the cold dogs? Well, they die. But the long-haired dog stays because he can handle the cold weather due to his long hair. So what happens? The long hair migrates up into the ice age area. The long-haired male and female meet in a cold climate. What kind of dog can they have? Any responses? Right. They can only have dogs with long hair. They cannot have short hair or medium-haired dogs because they lost the genetic information for short and medium hair. This is a loss of information from the original dog kind. So let's go the opposite direction. Let's do another application. So the 3 dogs from the original dog kind from Noah's Ark, let's say they go to a hot climate. And the weather gets hot. So the long-haired dog and the meaty-haired dog get hot. And they die. That leaves the short-haired dog left. And he's got his glasses. He looks cool. He can handle it. So the short-haired dog, male and female meet, and they can only produce short-haired dogs. They lost the capability to have long-haired dog offspring because all they have are short-haired genes. This is a loss of information. So what's new? A new combination of already existing information. There's less variability. This is the opposite of evolution. So natural selection involves a loss of information, a maintenance of existing information, and new combinations of information. So when you go from the original wolf to the measly poodle, you're losing information. Of course, evolution requires the opposite. It requires a gaining of information, new information added to the genes, and this isn't seen in observational science. In fact, evolution is a fairy tale, and it can't happen. And what do? They deceive people in saying, oh, we see natural selection or microevolution. We see the dogs changing from the original wolf down to the poodle, and they say, well, then the other evolution from amoebas to apes have to happen. And that's called a term macroevolution, where you evolve from primordial slime. So they confuse the people. You need to know the distinction. Natural selection is starting with the original information that God gave, and we're losing and combining information as the species come out. That's not evolution. Let's do it another way. Let's look at jelly beans, an indicator of genetic variability. So the wolf, the original dog kind off Noah's Ark, his jelly beans were filled to the max. He had all the genetic variability possible. And then a coyote comes out, and a dingo, and a collie, and you start losing gene jelly beans, okay? And then you get to the bulldog, and by the time you get to the poodle, you have like 1 jelly bean left. You're almost at the end. So again, evolutionary's tree and creation's orchard. Hopefully you can see the Bible says it's an orchard where God gave all the kinds, all the genetic ability to have these different species of animals. Let's apply this to the humans. So the Bible teaches Adam and Eve was our first parents. Then they had sons and daughters, and then Noah and his sons, and then the people at the Tower of Babel. And after that, dispersed with the different languages, different people groups and cultures. And that's what we have today. There's a short video, mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. Scientists are seeing that we originate from an original male and female. The problem is they can't hold to that, so they'll distort it. But here's a short clip where he describes what they're seeing in science, which is encouraging.
Secular scientists will talk about 2 genetic progenitors of the human race, mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. But they do not believe that there was a literal Adam and Eve. They'll say you can trace female mitochondrial DNA, it's a small subset of DNA passed on through mothers, back to a single woman. But they would say that woman was part of a larger population. You can look at Y chromosome, exists only in males, gets passed on only through males. Look at male diversity, trace it back to one guy. They'll say, well, that male was the progenitor of modern Y chromosomes, but he also existed as part of a population. So mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Adam, secular scientists say the diversity in these subsets of DNA go back to 2 individuals, but the vast majority of DNA goes back to a population, and these 2 individuals existed as part of a population, and therefore Adam and Eve are not literally true.
I have 2 talks dedicated to his research that weren't part of this series, but maybe I'll present it one time. Fascinating stuff. In fact, he's able to trace all the generations that go back to Noah's Ark and also the generations that go back to Adam and Eve, and it's all in our genes. It all proves the Bible. Now let's look at some of the geneticists and what they have to say. Here is Natalie Angier. Do races differ? Not really. DNA shows. New York Times, 2000. Dr. Venter, head of the Cellular Genomics Corporation in Rockville, Maryland, not far from here, and scientists at the National Institute of Health, recently announced that they had put together a draft of the entire sequence of the human genome, and the researchers unanimously declared there is only one race, the human race. Another article, Genetic Variation, Classification, and Race. Humans vary only slightly at the DNA level, and that only a small proportion of this variation separates continental populations or people groups. Another article, Tiny Gene Difference Makes Us Who We Are, 2008. But the genes that explain the phenotypic differences, characteristics like our hair color, etc., between populations only represent a tiny part of our genome, confirming once again that the concept of race from a genetic standpoint has been abolished. The scientists are getting rid of the term race because they see the evidence. There are no races. Another article, Destructive Nature of the Term Race, Growing Beyond a False Paradigm. Evidence continues to collect that the term race is meaningless, used to point out differences in people that are not definitive. Another article, Check Your Race in the box below, the American biology teacher. All humans are one race, Homo sapiens. There is absolutely no genetic or evolutionary justification for racial categories of humans. And another article, the criteria that people use for race are based entirely on external features that were programmed to recognize. And what they're getting at is, what are we programmed to recognize? Shades of our skin, melanin, whether it's dark brown or light brown, and maybe the eyes. We're programmed to look at that, but the geneticist says we shouldn't be doing that. So let's get into this in more detail. Different colors or the same color, different shades. So if you apply genetics to shades of skin color, big A's, big B's, little b's, where the capitals are lots of melanin and the small are small amounts, that you could get a dark brown versus light brown. And I'll show a video from Check This Out, Origin of Races, and then elaborate more on this.
I hear this one a lot. How can there be so many races in the world if we are all descendants of Adam and Eve? Well, check this out. First off, let's talk about the word race. Sometimes when people use the word, they mean supposed races of people who have evolved at different times, rates, and in different locations. That's not true. Of course, the word race is also a term we use to distinguish between groups with different physical traits, namely skin color. But are there really different races? Take a gander at Acts 17:26, where it is written that God, from one man, made every nation of men. It's clear then that the Bible teaches that there is one race, the human race. The Bible is also clear that all people on the earth are descendants of Adam and Eve who were created by God. Check Genesis 1:26 through 28. Easy enough. God created two people in his image, male and female, and told them to increase in number. So, Adam and Eve are mom and dad of the human race. Then, their children had children, and those children had children, and so on and so forth for many generations until, according to Genesis 6:9, the world's population was reduced to 8 people who were protected inside an ark during a global flood. And those 8 people later walked off the ark, and according to Genesis 9:19, from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Oh, wait a second. What do I mean scattered? Well, jump over to Genesis 11 and let's talk about an event known as the Tower of Babel. Basically, because of the sinful actions of the descendants of Noah, the Lord confused their language and scattered them from there over all the earth. That's pretty clear and concise. Okay, so we've got lots of people who are descendants of the 8 folks who came off the ark, and now they have been scattered all over the earth. That explains that we are still one race and that different groups of people ended up in different locations. But how do we get a bunch of different colored people if we are all one race? Well, follow along. This, of course, is a simplified explanation, but the basic principles are true. We all have a pigment in our bodies called melanin, which, depending on different variables, produces different shades of the one main skin color we all possess. Several genes control the amount of melanin produced and thus the variability in the skin shade. In fact, it's easy for one couple to produce a wide range of skin shade variability in just one generation, as we'll see in just a moment. Time for a quick genetics lesson. DNA is the molecule of heredity that is passed from parents to children. A child inherits 23 chromosomes from each parent. Each chromosome pair contains hundreds of genes, which regulate the physical development of the child. However, to illustrate basic genetic principles pertaining to the topic, we'll just talk about two genes, the genes that control the production of melanin. So, let capital A and capital B symbolize versions of the gene that code for large amounts of melanin, while little a and little b code for small amounts. Got it? Easy. Check this out. Take a look at the upper left. Let's say Dad contributes capital A, capital B genes, and Mom contributes capital A, capital B genes as well. Together, they will produce a child with capital A, capital A, capital B, and capital B. This is a kid with a lot of melanin, and thus he will have very dark skin. Easy to see. Here's the bigger point, though. Let's say Dad contributes capital A, capital B, and Mom contributes little a and little b. Well, the child's skin will be middle brown shade, the combination of capital A, little a, and capital B, little b, which, by the way, represents a majority of the world's population. Not only that, but if each parent is capital A, capital B, little b, the combinations that could be produced in their children could result in a very wide range of skin shades in just one generation. So, since Adam and Eve were the first people ever, it makes sense to conclude that God placed in them a combination of genes that could produce all different shades of skin we see. Those same combinations would be present in Noah and the 7 other people who boarded the ark. And because God dispersed people at the Tower of Babel, he dispersed the population, thereby isolating gene pools in the different people groups. Over time, different cultures formed in different locations with certain features like skin shade becoming predominant. And here we are today. And since we all go back to Noah and his family, it makes sense that we are all different shades of brown. One race, multiple people groups, just like the Bible teaches. Simplified for sure, but enough said.
Okay, so what shade, not color, was Adam and Eve's skin? Well, if they only had small a, small b, that would be a light brown. And if that's the case, Adam and Eve could only have light brown skin, small a, small b. They wouldn't have the diversity needed to have different shades of brown. What about if Adam and Eve had dark brown skin, capital A, capital B? Then they would lack genetic variation, and they could only have dark brown skin children. So actually, the truth was Adam and Eve had a diversity of genes available. In fact, they could have in one generation all the different colors from their children. They could have had a light brown skinned baby, medium, or dark, because they had the genetic capability for that. And we see a sample here. I have a picture of, this was from the National Geographic, where they showed the different variations of children with light brown to dark brown, where you could show the gamut. But also, even in genetics today, we're finding twin babies where you had a light brown skinned baby and a dark brown skinned baby from the same parents. In fact, here's an article where they had twin girls and their babies were light brown and dark brown skin. And you can see the father is a darker brown skin and the mother's a lighter brown. So they had the genetic capability to have the different skin tones. Another example in UK, mom defies 1,000,000 to 1 odds to give birth to black and white boys. So they had the capability in their gene pool to produce this. So what the facts show us, that there are differences among us, but they stem from culture, not race. And the video mentioned Acts 17:26. He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. So God has made one blood of every nation of men. So biological fact, all humans belong to one race. But we want to make a distinction as we close. Spiritual fact, all humans are divided into 2 spiritual races. And what's the difference between the 2 spiritual races? And I'll close with one verse, 2 Corinthians 6:14, which reads, "Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial? Or what has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God, and God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people." So what are the 2 spiritual races? Anybody want to guess? The 2 spiritual races. Any guesses? Yep, exactly. Believers and unbelievers, believers in Christ. Those who are in the light and those who are in the darkness. The temple of the living God and idols. Christ and Belial. I guess another word for Satan or wickedness and evil. We should look past genetics, hair color, hair amount, eye shape, skin shade, height, weight, and look at the person, their mind, their needs, their heart, their cares, hurts, spiritual condition. We have an example in 1 Samuel 16:7 where it says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at the appearance or at the physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." And I have a short video summarizing this, Tower of Babel, and then we'll close.
When you visit a coffee shop like this, you're likely to see people of diverse ethnicity from all walks of life. Remember, the Bible says we are all one race, human beings. There may be some physical differences between us in the color of our skin or the color of our eyes, but these are only superficial. The emphasis on differences and not our similarities comes from man, not the Bible. Race is an evolutionary concept that leads dangerously to the idea that some races are more advanced than others. Thomas Huxley used his book Evidence as to Man's Place in Nature to promote his racist views. Others have promoted the idea of race to justify one group of people's supposed superiority over another, or horribly, to justify man's inhumanity to man based on a perverse notion of survival of the fittest. But according to the Bible, we are all of one blood, descendants of Adam and Eve, and the sons of Noah. And what does all this mean to us? Well, in Acts 17:26, we read that He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. Who we are and how we got here are all by God's design. When we consider the current world population, it's easy to wonder if so many people could have actually descended from Noah. Even secular geneticists have to admit that we have a common ancestor. Christians call them Adam and Eve. As for the Tower of Babel, it's not just referenced in the Bible. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus wrote about it in 440 BC. Modern archaeologists have excavated the ruins of Babylon and other places mentioned in the Bible. Understanding the scientific evidence that supports the biblical account builds confidence in our faith. God saved Noah because he has a plan for mankind. God scattered people across the earth because he has a plan for mankind. Sounds like God has a plan for all of us, me and you.
Before I close, any questions? Okay. Yeah.
I think you got in trouble on YouTube with the poodle
Trouble with YouTube with what?
With the poodle.
Okay. Oh, picking on poodles. Yeah. Okay. All right. I have 3 questions. Hopefully they're not too hard. The first one's the hardest. Why were the people disobedient at the Tower of Babel? Any quick answers, you think?
They didn't spread across the earth.
Right. They didn't spread across the earth, and they defied God, and they knew God's command, but they deliberately went against him. How many languages came from the Tower of Babel? I said a number there. Does anybody? 70. Very good. And then according to the Bible, how many races are there? 1. Okay. That's it. Thanks for your attention.